Welcome to Resistance Live. Since 2017, Resistance Live has been the go-to home for political and legal news and analysis through a decidedly progressive activist lens. I'm your host, Elizabeth Cronise McLaughlin. I'm a former Wall Street and human rights lawyer, a lifelong organizer, and a leadership and impact consultant for all those seeking to lead big progressive change in these incredibly challenging times. To get bonus broadcasts, ask questions, and more, don't forget to become a paid subscriber to the show at patreon.com/resistancelive. And to learn more about what we do to help progressive leaders everywhere, check out GaiaLeadershipProject.com. And now, here's today's show. I promised you guys we had new intros coming when we started to get ready to reboot the podcast part of this. And so there you have it. That's it. There you go. You've seen it today. There will be a new outro coming soon as well. But nice to see you all here. Fancy schmancy. All right. Today for our visually challenged viewers, I'm wearing a cream colored sweater. I am a pink skinned, green eyed, dirty blonde haired woman and my hair is down. I'm coming to you as always from occupied Muncie, Lenape, and Mohican land. Okay, so we have to talk today about what's going on between Pritzer and Trump because something very strange happened yesterday at one of Trump's press events, which is that he said something like, we are trying to decide whether we're going into Chicago, with the implication of we have a hostile governor, or whether we're going into New Orleans, where we have a red state governor and a blue city. Very kind of fancy, interesting moment there, right? Because all of a sudden, fancy is not the right word, but all of a sudden what we were seeing there was what is potentially a rollback of the intent to invade Chicago. Now, simultaneously, there's a bunch of things happening right now with the U.S. military and this planned invasion of Chicago. There is a roll-up of military outside of Chicago. We know where they're staging. There is information this morning from Governor Pritzer that they're expecting some kind of military intervention as soon as this weekend. So what we know right now is that apparently, the buildup of U.S. military to invade a U.S. city to terrorize U.S. people is still underway. However, there seems to be a little bit of consternation and concern on the part of the regime about what's going to happen if they do this and whether or not they're actually going to go ahead with it. Because Pritzer, as we all know, has been incredibly strong in his statements about this. Every single day right now is making press conferences about how the only aim of this is to seize power and terrorize people. He's been advising people in Chicago to film things when and if this invasion begins. He's been advising people to show up and make their voices heard. And, that's working. And he's not letting there be any room between the agenda that Trump wants to throw out there and the propagandist idea that it's to respond to crime versus his intent to actually use the U.S. military, particularly against Black and brown people in a major U.S. city, this time not using the Posse Comitatus Act, as we've discussed here, but doing it with the Texas National Guard under the control of the Texas governor invading another state. So from where we sit on all of this, it is yet to be determined whether or not Chicago will actually experience what is threatened. And at the same time, I have to point out a couple of things. The first is that the only reason why there is any wavering here in the context of what Trump is considering doing and the regime is considering doing is because Pritzer, as the governor of Illinois, has been relentless about the refusal to capitulate to this, calling out the bullshit every chance he gets, refusing to say that the propaganda is true, and adamantly stating that they are going to explore every option to stop it. So the thing to remember here is that when you cower in front of a bully, you're going to get more of the same. And a refusal to be cowed, a refusal to capitulate, a refusal to comply with what the Trump administration is trying to do here is the only way to see a potential outcome that doesn't involve violence against people of Chicago, right? I have to say that I think there's a huge lesson in this for all of us. right? Because we've seen what's happened. There's been so much criticism of Mayor Muriel Bowser in the last couple of days in DC because she's done this kind of wishy-washy thing. And granted, DC is in a different situation than Chicago. DC doesn't have statehood, which, by the way, needs to be rectified like immediately as soon as Democrats are back in power. But all that said, she has kind of tried this fuzzy-lined pseudo-capitulation to Trump's federal occupation of the District of Columbia in violation of law. Unlike that, Pritzer is like, nope, don't even try it. You come for our people, we're going to stand up and defend ourselves. And that in and of itself sends a message that may be enough to stop it in the first place. So this is the thing that I just want to remind everybody of. And Kelly Hayes, who is a phenomenal organizer in Chicago, co-author of Let This Radicalize You with Mariam Kaba, has been posting about her own organizing work and about this point of us all, but particularly the people of Chicago, this is part of the work, internal and external in terms of our own organizing, needing to pivot away from fear and panic and move in the direction of actual sustained, relentless resistance. Because that's what works, right? This is what we all need to understand. Either we do nothing or we capitulate, in which case we lose no matter what, or we take a tactic that stands some chance of success. So the only option here is honestly for people to stop being terrified and be like, F no, this is not going to fly in our city. Or F no, you're not building a concentration camp in my town. Or F no, I'm not going to allow you to terrorize people where I live, right? And that's going to take many forms in terms of what it is that we choose to do in our own local communities. But I think there's a huge lesson to be taken here in the context of what Pritzer is doing, even if the invasion of Chicago happens. And let me tell you why. Because one of the things that he's been able to do by taking the stand that he's taken is warn people, tell people how to get prepared, give people specific instructions on what they should do if and when that invasion begins. And you know, although we don't know the outcome of this yet, that he's exploring legal options, that I'm sure he's exploring other options because, you know, there's a lot of conversations happening out there on social media about like what happens if the Illinois National Guard is mobilized against the Texas National Guard. That's a conversation. And we all know that he's looking at ways to stop this. But I'm going to tell you one thing that he's not doing. He's not negotiating. Okay. And that in and of itself, I think really has a lot to teach us, to teach other blue state governors, to teach anybody, frankly, who is at the moment walking around in a state of fear and panic, because JB Pritzer is not afraid and he's not panicking. And even if he is afraid, he's still walking the talk. So again, we've got to take the lessons from this as they seem, and we'll see what happens next. I will tell you right now, given what was said yesterday, I would not be at all surprised to see a complete pivot to New Orleans because Louisiana has a Republican governor, albeit a blue state mayor, and we're going to see what happens then, because I'm going to tell you something else. Pritzer is inspiring a lot of people. And, you know, quite unlike, let me just say this because I have to say it, Gavin Newsom, who continues to throw trans people under the bus and raid homeless encampments in California, Pritzer is actually showing people what to do in response. He's actually leading his people in a direction of how to respond to what's coming. And I think it's brilliant, frankly. I'm like really super impressed. Okay. I talked yesterday about the legality, by the way, or lack thereof, of the way in which the Texas National Guard has been mobilized. There is no question, the Texas National Guard invading Illinois is a violation of the principles of the Constitution. Just so all of you know, because I did not say this yesterday, this is kind of funky. This is the legal concept that you're going to want to know about. The Supreme Court has original jurisdiction over any dispute between the states. It acts as a trial court in cases between the states. The most recent example of this is that New York and New Jersey got into a battle, I think it was about 15 years ago, over who owned Ellis Island and the Statue of Liberty. Did it belong to New Jersey or did it belong to New York? That case was litigated in the Supreme Court of the United States of America because that's the only place that one state can sue another state, okay? So we could end up in a situation here where Illinois sues Texas, and that case is going to end up in front of the Supreme Court instantly. Really kind of fascinating. Like, we'll have to see what happens with that. All right. Yesterday, we had, as we discussed on yesterday's broadcast, a press conference on Capitol Hill by a group of Epstein survivors who then also later on in the afternoon, went door to door on the Hill to talk to elected officials about the importance of pushing to get the Epstein files released. A number of them then did press events in the evening. I watched one of them, who is now a sex trafficking expert, last night on MSNBC. Others were on CNN. We saw an awful lot of just mass press coverage on this. So I was asked this morning on the Patreon feed. Quick reminder, by the way, that if you want to ask me questions, you have to join the Patreon feed, patreon.com/resistancelive, for as little as $5 a month. And there's a 20% discount right now until a week from tomorrow on annual subscriptions, if you want to take advantage of that using the code podcast. Okay, so I was asked on the Patreon feed, what's the point? Like, what's the reason for all of them coming together now that Epstein is dead? Okay, so let me just say this. There is safety in numbers. One of the things that we saw yesterday at this press conference was that quite a number of survivors who we had never seen before, whose names we had never known, but who have been involved with attorneys pressing their cases, actually stepped forward yesterday to make statements or identify themselves. And they can only do that because so many others have lit the path, including most especially Virginia Roberts Giuffre. One of the things that I want to point out about what happened yesterday that feels really significant is that, and is really significant, is that as one of the survivors said yesterday, she was afraid for years that if she came forward, someone would kill her. Like, that's the kind of power that was being levered against these women and girls in the event that they chose to speak out about the horrific things that they endured at the hands of Jeffrey Epstein and his friends. So all of them coming together actually is a real watershed moment for this case, because they want to know what happened with the sweetheart deal with Alex Acosta in Florida when Epstein was first arrested in the late aughts and was allowed to leave jail all day long and then come back to sleep there. And where this blanket immunity was granted, which is totally unenforceable, by the way. Nonetheless, others are trying it. Maxwell's trying it in her appeal, that claimed that anybody who'd ever been affiliated with Jeffrey Epstein couldn't be prosecuted for any crimes related to it. That is an unheard of deal under federal law or any state law, frankly. It's kind of like a blanket waiver of prosecution. It's crazy. And so, of course, they want to know exactly what happened with that deal, because if, in the instance of some of them, they would not have been assaulted if he had actually gone to prison for the crimes for which he was first arrested. Okay. The second thing that I think is really significant about it is that together they can put an enormous amount of pressure on elected officials. And they clearly know that, right? Somebody asked me yesterday, well, why aren't they already releasing the names of all the famous men who molested them? I'm just going to tell you right now, the strategy behind this is genius. Like, first of all, they clearly have very good legal advisors, all right? But the fact that they are compiling their own list, signaling that they are compiling their own list, waiting to release it, puts an enormous amount of pressure on government officials, potentially, who don't know who's on that list, right? Who may be thinking to themselves, well, who else is going to be taken down in this, right? And like, they know they're serious, right? That it's going to come out one way or another. So why not release the files? So I personally think that it's great that they're coming together in this way, that we're seeing like 100 victims come forward. There was reporting a couple of days ago that is 1/10 of Epstein's victims. 1/10, 1,000 girls. I mean, it's insane. It's just so depraved. So, the fact that they're coming together and they're advocating as a group, I think makes a massive difference. And I think it actually helps to validate the need for the files to be released. Now, of course, two things happened yesterday by the Trump administration in response to this. One is they arranged a military flyover at the time of the press conference to try to drown out what these women were saying. You want to talk about like making it look like you're guilty? Arranging a military flyover so victims can't be heard, like literally can't be heard, kind of looks about as guilty as you can get. Okay, but then the second thing that happened was Donald Trump called this whole thing a Democratic hoax. Let me just tell you something. That is not going to sit well, not only with Democrats, but also with his own base. Why? Because all along, for like the last 9 years, they've been talking to their base about the Epstein files and about the need to bring down all these powerful sex perverts, right? And how the files were going to be released as soon as Trump was brought into office. And now he's calling it a Democratic hoax. Are you kidding? Even people in his own base don't buy that. So again, I just have to reiterate this. Whatever is in the Epstein files includes allegations against Donald Trump that are so horrible that they are going to these lengths to try to silence the survivors. And we can't forget that. I mean, we need those files released. Something else happened yesterday that was actually quite interesting, which is that we talked about this a little bit yesterday. Thomas Massie, who is no great liberal, Republican House elected member of the Freedom Caucus, has taken the fore now in pushing for legislation that will force the release of the Epstein files. And he thinks he's got enough people on board for it to pass because he's got the whole Democratic Party and he needs a tiny handful of Republicans to vote in favor of it. All right. I am watching that one like a hawk, and again, he gave a press conference yesterday where he was like, I don't really care, basically, what Trump is threatening. These files need to be released. So again, we're going to see what happens with that, but there's movement on that. There was also something very interesting that happened on the Hill yesterday that actually shocked me, which is that there was a resolution to censure LaMonica McIver, who you all know is my rep in the House of Representatives, was at Delaney Hall when Mayor of Newark Ross Baraka was arrested, and is now being prosecuted in the District Court of New Jersey for obstruction of justice because she was shoved by an ICE agent while Ross Baraka was being arrested. It's a crazy case. Never should have been brought. And nonetheless, the far right-wing cult members in the House of Representatives put a censure motion on the floor to censure her. Well, yesterday, something fascinating happened. The censure motion failed. And it failed not just because all of the Democrats voted against it. It failed because a substantial chunk of the GOP voted against it also. I think if I'm remembering correctly, the number was like 14. So there's a few things happening now that are indications that there are areas where the lines are not holding for Trump, okay? And that's on top of the fact that this morning there is very significant polling reporting on approval numbers, all right? Like Rubio's approval numbers are down 14 points. Hegseth's approval numbers are down by like 20 points. Not surprising, right? RFK Jr.'s approval rating is down by like 11 points. It should be more. So their ratings are plummeting, among other things. And there may be a moment here where there is like a breaking point around what people are willing to do on deep instructions from Donald Trump, particularly when it comes to some of these issues related to Epstein. I'm going to take a moment to just mention Nancy Mace here because I just have to point something out, okay? Nancy Mace is a malignant narcissist. If you haven't realized this yet, you should. She is a virulent anti-trans monster. Like, that's the only way to put it. Several years after having like endorsed the LGBTQ community and marriage equality and other things, she flipped. And now she spends her time claiming that she has been assaulted by trans individuals who come up to speak to her at her events, okay? Yesterday, she turned a hearing concerning the Epstein matter into something that focused entirely on herself. She claimed that she is a sexual assault survivor. She had to leave because she was so upset. She was experiencing PTSD symptoms, blah, 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 blah. Now, in ordinary circumstances, for any other survivor, you all know I am one. I'm a CSA survivor. I have a complex PTSD diagnosis. I get it. In any other circumstance, I would be like, okay, I get that. I understand that. I had a hard time watching the press conference yesterday, okay? But this hearing is not about Nancy Mace. It's not about Nancy Mace. This hearing is about literally, again, the hundreds and hundreds of teenage girls who were victimized by Jeffrey Epstein, trafficked by Jeffrey Epstein all over the country and out of the United States, okay, who were raped repeatedly. It's about them, okay? You have a hard time watching that. I get it. Don't be there. Walk out. But the thing you don't do is draw attention away to what's actually happening, okay? You are not the center of the attention of that hearing. And I frankly am like done with that woman, like done, just done. Like if I never hear from her again, it'll be too soon. So nobody should be giving Nancy Mace any credence for having left that hearing and then posted on social media about how traumatized she was. Let's just imagine it from the perspective of a teenage girl, right? With no family support, who's recruited out of poverty by Ghislaine Maxwell to service Jeffrey Epstein 3 times a day. I want to hear about her empathy for them. because that's where the focus should be. And until she starts doing something like that, let alone like apologizes profusely to every trans person that she's ever thrown under the bus or accused of assault, I frankly don't want to give her one whit of credibility. Okay, that's it. I can't stand that woman, in case you couldn't tell. All right. We have to talk for a second about the murder, talked about this a little bit yesterday, of 11 people on a boat by the U.S. military. Okay. There was some breaking news yesterday that put this whole thing into another context. Now, as we talked about yesterday, the claim by Marco Rubio and others was that this boat was carrying drugs into the United States and they bombed it out of the sky. Okay. Murdered 11 people. Total violation of international law. Can't do that, right? The rules of international law and, the rules of like interdicting boats are that you're supposed to stop the boat, board it. You can do a search and seizure if you have probable cause to believe that there's like actual drugs on the boat. You do not murder people on suspicion of drug trafficking. Okay. But it gets worse because what the news revealed yesterday is that in fact, what was probably happening on that boat was migrants, people fleeing violence, were on that boat traveling to Trinidad to try to escape their home countries. And I have to tell you that this is a lesson to all of us, but to the press in particular, that nothing that comes out of this administration should be trusted. Because what it looks like right now is that they use the U.S. military to engage in a cold-blooded murder of 11 migrants on a boat for the sake of generating video that they could then post to their social media accounts to show how tough they are. They're not tough. They're mass executioners. That's what they are. They're fascists. And then lo and behold, Rubio doubled down and was like, don't expect anything like this to stop. Okay, murderer. I guess you've shown us who you really are. So, one of the things that I just want people to remember here is that they are at the moment trying to show us violence in particular ways to terrify people. All right. I also just have to mention one other thing because somebody asked me about this morning on the Patreon feed. Apparently, there's a rumor going around that this video is AI generated. I'm just going to say one thing about that. It would be awfully convenient to this administration, given the fact that they ordered the military to do something illegal and the military complied. And now we're in hot water, not just with Venezuela, but in the context of international waters, for them to claim that video was AI created. That would give them a very easy out. So as with anything else, I have to point something out, okay? When you hear something that sounds a little bit off, oh, that video may have been AI generated, I want you to ask yourselves, this is true of any form of disinformation, who benefits if this is true? Because I'll tell you something. If that video is AI generated, the only person who wins from that is Donald Trump and his people. That's not AI, folks. I'm just going to call it right now. They murdered people. They murdered 11 migrants on a boat for no reason. Like, that's what they did. And they should be held to account for it. Okay, we had some other developments yesterday, very quickly, about these kids who in the middle of the night were loaded onto planes to be deported to Guatemala. And that was stopped, as we discussed yesterday, in a Saturday marathon session by a federal judge starting at 2:30 in the morning until all of those children were returned to the Office of Refugee Resettlement to be reunited with family members waiting for them inside the United States. I read some of the affidavits, as I told you guys yesterday. More of them broke yesterday afternoon. And these children, these kids were woken up at 2:30 in the morning, loaded en masse onto planes. They had a list of who was being deported and who wasn't, terrified kids who weren't being deported by making them stand there and determine whether or not they were leaving for countries where nobody can take care of them with no resources, no money. These are like 10-year-olds, right? Or whether or not they could stay in the United States. And some of these kids were so terrified that they vomited while boarding the plane. Okay. I just have to say that I've said this many times before. I'm going to repeat it again. We are going to need Nuremberg-style trials when this is all over, because they are torturing little children, little brown children, for no reason, right? For the sadistic terrorism of torturing children. That's what these people are doing. That's what they're justifying in the name of immigration policy. It's disgusting. And the vast majority of these kids have family members in the United States who are waiting to take them, who they are waiting to be reunited with. It's horrifying, horrifying. Again, you got to be aware of this stuff. You can't look away from it, because there is going to come a moment down the road, hopefully sooner rather than later, where the people who have perpetrated this are going to be held to account. They are torturing kids in the name of mass deportation because they're like racist fucks. I said it. I'm not taking it back. It's really, really upsetting. Okay, we had a question about this opinion written by Judge Burroughs, a federal judge, where essentially there's a footnote in one of his opinions that's getting a lot of play. And the footnote essentially challenged the Supreme Court in its current rulings against people who are suing the Trump administration. Essentially said the Supreme Court is making all these decisions on the shadow docket without any explanation as to why, that are overturning established precedent or calling established precedent into question. And then you expect the lower courts to actually interpret it without any form of guidance. Okay, true. And one of the things that this is doing, which I think is a very significant thing, is it is challenging Chief Justice Roberts to actually start doing his job, because the lower courts are supposed to be able to follow the guidance of the Supreme Court when it rules. And one of the things that has happened since January is we've had all these opinions on the shadow docket that just absolutely run contrary to the law. And that in and of itself is making it very difficult for lower court judges to do their job. So I have already said before that there is a crisis in the judiciary, right? We know this already, that there is a crisis of the lower courts following the law, only in some instances, not all, to have that overturned by the Supreme Court of the United States. And that is setting up kind of a battle royale in the judiciary about like, what actually does the law mean? Does the law even exist anymore? Is it just words? And all of that right now, I think, is something, again, that we have to keep an eye on, because the final backstop right now against this administration in many instances is the judiciary saying, nope. We've had more rulings in the last 48 hours, by the way, that have stopped the Trump administration than we've seen in several weeks. And so we need an important recognition here, which I think is what Judge Burroughs was trying to do, that the Supreme Court is actually defying established precedent, giving no explanation for why it's giving carte blanche to the administration, is not actually interpreting the law as they're supposed to. And that's making it just incredibly difficult for lower courts to know what to do, because they're supposed to follow the precedent and the lead of the Supreme Court under like the doctrines of how our legal system works. So, very interesting moment. Again, something to watch. Okay. I had a question on the Patreon feed this morning about what happens if everyone resigns. So I just have to point something out. Everyone is not going to resign, all right? Like, that's not going to happen. We're not going to have a moment where the entire administration resigns because, say, Epstein files, right? That's not going to happen. Could we have a moment where there is like a medical excuse made? Epstein files are released. It turns out there's videotape of Trump raping teenage girls, which happens to be not out of the realm of possibility, and he resigns on some medical excuse. Yes. Then we have President J.D. Vance, right? Vance is not going to resign because of the Epstein files. Vance is not going to resign because of anything. Vance is power hungry, and he has Peter Thiel and the other oligarchs backing him up, okay? We have a line of succession in this country, by the way. I mean, it's like documented, written down, part of the federal code, okay? If the president resigns, then the vice president takes office. Vice president can nominate their own new vice president, but that person can't be confirmed without a vote of both houses of Congress to confirm them, okay? After that, it goes to the president, Speaker of the House first, so that's Mike Johnson, then the president pro tem of the Senate, which is usually the oldest serving senator, okay? That doesn't bode well. So nonetheless, and then it rolls down through the cabinet, all right? There's no way that the entire administration is going to resign at once, all right? There is a possibility that if J.D. Vance becomes president, the cabinet will be rewritten, essentially. Like, some people will leave because they don't want to work for J.D. Vance. He may fire others because he doesn't think they're good enough, or for whatever reason. They're not sycophantish enough, or like Peter Thiel doesn't like them, or Elon Musk thinks they suck. There's all sorts of reasons why you would have a new cabinet in that situation. But there is no possibility that the entire regime is going to resign. And I just have to have a moment here of talking about this, because I posted in a couple of places actually today that one of the things we have to think about in the aftermath of this weekend's like, is he dying moment, is the fact that wishful thinking and waiting for things to happen is not effective resistance to this regime. Okay. And I think one of the things that's a little bit dangerous right now is that it's really compelling, just in the same way that it was to think that Robert Mueller was going to save us back in 2017 or 2018, that there's going to be some watershed act of God event that's going to end all of this. The bad news is, I mean, never say never. None of us knows what's going to happen. But the bad news is, I don't think that's coming. I think that what's going to end up happening, even if for some reason Trump can't serve out his term, is that we will end up with much more controllable fascists in office. And that's going to require even more strategic and well-organized resistance. So the point at this moment about all of this is that we all have to actually keep doing the work. And if we haven't started doing the work, like, we have to do it now. You've got to get involved with community organizations where you live. You need to start doing something that moves the needle where you live, to create a stronger community, to create community networks, and that actually is organized to save lives or fight back. You know, protests are great if you choose to go do that, but there's a lot of people suffering right now. The economy, yesterday there was a report that there are more people unemployed right now than there are jobs available in the United States. And this morning in the pharmaceutical sector, by the way, the level of unemployment spiked to levels of the Great Recession. Okay. So we have some things happening in the economy that are indicators that, you know, like, in addition to everything that's coming with the murder budget, when the vast majority of it goes into effect next year, we've got really serious considerations right now about people being hungry, people not being able to have health care because, you know, they're going to eviscerate parts of the ACA next year. That, you know, there's all sorts of things that are going to require our own individual attention where we live to help support people who need it, and to help protect marginalized people in particular. So, like, get involved. Like, don't wait for an act of God. I know that Friday night was fun online, and simultaneously, there's a real desperate need to not allow the wishful thinking to make us complacent, right? Like, the work is now, the work is needed, the work does not end, okay? We have too much to do and too many people at risk. All right, that's it for today. I will be back here live tomorrow. There will be a bonus weekly broadcast tomorrow for all of our Patreon subscribers. Reminder, if you're not over there, we are running a 20% discount right now off of annual subscriptions at patreon.com/resistancelive using the code podcast. I have it on good authority that we will be out streaming on the podcast platforms, hopefully by tomorrow. There's been a couple of technical glitches behind the scenes, but you all ought to be able to get it everywhere. I think starting tomorrow, maybe Monday at the latest. But please head on over to Patreon and subscribe if you're interested in getting our weekly bonus broadcast, which is usually on Friday afternoon. Patreon subscribers, stay tuned to a time for that because it will not be at 3:30. It will be earlier than that on East Coast time. So stay tuned. And I will catch you all back here live tomorrow. Please give me a thumbs up. Subscribe if you haven't done so already. Make sure that you are sharing this broadcast with your friends. Drop me a comment if you're watching after the broadcast is live. And you guys are awesome. And I will catch you all back here tomorrow. All right, take care. Bye.